here in Germany, the opposition Conservative leader says his party will not work with the far right if, as expected, his Conservatives win this month's national elections. The CDU leader, Friedrich Merz, is likely to become Germany's next chancellor. He's being criticised for presenting an anti-immigration motion in Parliament that relied on support from the far-right AfD.
Merz, a disgrace. Just one sign outside the party conference showing how unhappy people are at Germany's likely next leader relying on the far right.
We did the right thing, but we got support from some of the wrong colleagues in the German Bundestag. But still, the population, the majority of the German people are behind what we have proposed to limit migration to Germany.
Last week, a CDU motion for stricter migration policies passed only with support from the far-right Alternative for Germany. That's planted seeds of distrust among the other parties in Parliament, parties that Friedrich Merz needs to keep on his side for coalition talks after the election. Conservative figures are resolute. They will not work with the far-right.
No to any cooperation with the AfD. We will not help the AfD. My friends, we will fight them with full determination.
But we've been here before. The Alternative for Germany has been building up support in recent years and has practically cemented itself in second place behind the Conservatives in the polls. Despite the party breathing down his neck, Friedrich Merz is adamant that he won't change his mind.
We will not work with the party that calls itself the Alternative for Germany. We haven't before. We won't in the future. Not ever. This party goes against everything. This party goes against everything that our party and our country has built in recent years and decades in Germany.
Merz is hoping to win the election by taking a tougher stance on migration, one of the biggest issues in the campaign, with just 3 weeks to go until Germans cast their votes.
Well, our chief political editor, Michaela Kuffner, has been speaking with Friedrich Merz about his rejection of the AfD and how Germany and Europe should prepare for the challenges ahead.
With me is Friedrich Merz, the CDU-CSU candidate for chancellor. Mr. Merz, today was a turbulent day on the markets. Donald Trump has caused quite a bit of turbulence with his announcement of tariffs and then their withdrawal or suspension. Europe is looking to Germany to restore stability. What is your response to Donald Trump at this moment? And how do you propose Europe remains unified?
We've experienced all of this before. These decisions from Donald Trump are not new to his current term in office. 8 years ago, he made a similar decision to put tariffs on steel and aluminum from Europe. The European Union decided at the time to impose tariffs on jeans, whiskey, and motorcycles. And then Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker traveled to Washington and spoke to Donald Trump about it. And after 6 weeks, they both decided to withdraw the tariffs. All I can say is that we shouldn't enter into a trade war now. There will be some turbulence now. I see the turbulence on the markets too. I see what's happening in Canada and Mexico, but I also see what's happening in the US. I cannot imagine that it will not have an impact on consumer prices in America. And that will possibly lead to discussions in America too. So Donald Trump has started something that we have to solve together.
He also said Europe is next. There are still 3 weeks until the elections in Germany. Last week, we saw a very tense debate among the major parties in parliament. Is communication still open if Germany has to react before election day?
Yes, of course, we can talk to each other at any time. The German Bundestag will remain able to act at any time until the new Bundestag convenes. For example, the old Bundestag can still hold sessions even after the election. That has happened before. So the German parliament is always ready and able to act. But this is more a matter for the government, and above all for the EU Commission, because trade policy is the business of the European Union, and it's the EU Commission that's responsible for this. However, the EU Commission must try to get the approval approval of the member states. The more united Europe is in this situation, the better off we are, and the stronger we are with respect to Washington.
Zu bekommen. Je geschlossener Europa in dieser Situation ist, je besser ist es und je stärker sind wir auch gegenüber Washington.
We're here now at the party conference, the last one before the election. You were more or less on the defensive, even towards your party's own members, about why last week you passed legislation in the German Bundestag for the first time with the help of votes from the far-right party AfD. Have you been able to convince them?
Nobody in this room has any doubts, and citizens need not have any doubts either, because my message has always been clear. We're not working with that party.
Wir arbeiten mit dieser Partei nicht zusammen.
That wasn't the case last week, and it won't be the case this week, next week, or the week after that. We won't tolerate them. We're not holding any talks with the AfD or anything. The AfD stands for the exact opposite of everything that is important to us. NATO, Western ties, the EU, the Euro, the AfD wants out of everything. That is not our policy. It's the legacy of our party that the AfD is questioning here. It wants to destroy the CDU. You can't seriously believe that I would have talks with those who openly declare that they want to destroy the CDU, my party. There couldn't be any bigger gulf between us.
Vernichten zu wollen. Also größer als diese Gräben kann es nicht mehr sein.
Chancellor Scholz from the SPD doesn't believe you. He's using this in his campaign. It's also true that after the election you will probably need his Social Democrats and/or the Greens to be able to create a stable government in Germany again. Will you be able to put this feud behind you afterwards? And how do you plan to do that?
The SPD needs an election campaign issue. If it had had one, it actually could have agreed to our proposals last week, because everything we proposed in the influx limitation law was already agreed on by the SPD. Everything was already unanimously agreed in the Conference of State Premiers, and some of it is in the SPD election manifesto. So you can take my word that after the election, if we have to talk to them, they will talk to us.
Wenn wir mit denen reden müssen, werden sie mit uns reden.
Let's join our chief political editor, Michaela Kufner, who is at the CDU conference. Welcome back, Michaela. How did Mr. Merz's emphatic rejection of the AfD go down with delegates there?
Well, that was one of two moments here where he did get standing ovations. But the really interesting thing is that he felt the need to reiterate this time and time again. He's been on the record, and I've lost count of it, how often saying adamantly that he will not cooperate with the far-right AfD after, of course, accepting AfD votes last week to pass and get a majority for a non-binding motion that is anti-migration, that is tough on migration, that would allow for the rejection of migrants at the border. Well, none of this is coming into force, certainly not before he comes into office, before we know whether he gets elected as the next chancellor. But many people felt, and that's what all these protests are about, that he had crossed a red line, that this was the first crack in the so-called firewall against the far right. And one has to know that the far-right AfD here in Germany is perceived to be extreme, even by the far-right Marine Le Pen in France. So many in Europe don't want to cooperate with them. And this is the firewall that Friedrich Merz keeps reiterating, clearly here to his own followers who feel themselves on the defensive when they face the voters on the streets who keep asking them or keep seeking reassurance that, of course, they shouldn't be working with the far-right AfD.
OK, let's talk about those protesters. Protests at the weekend and, as you say, protests outside the convention centre today. Will today's rejection of the AfD by Mr Merz be enough to convince those protesters that this is absolutely not on the cards?
Well, that's a big question, and we're all waiting with bated breath to see the first meaningful polling. That will take at least another week until we actually see this whole question, these question marks that arose after he accepted those AfD votes last week in Parliament, and the ferocious debate we saw following when that comes through. But these people who went to the streets, some 160,000 yesterday, a very impressive crowd, are unlikely to be Conservative CDU-CSU voters anyway. What he has done, that is for sure, he has energized the Social Democrat and the Green camp, who was somewhat themselves on the offensive on the key issue of the economy. And the feeling also amongst some critics here in the party is, was this really necessary? You were on a pretty safe path with 30% in the polls, strong polling that could have fairly easily carried Friedrich Merz and his party through until the 23rd of February. Instead, he did choose this showdown in Parliament over the very issue of migration. Too early today to tell whether this will cost him more in support than he will gain. But the key date, of course, is the 23rd of February, election day.
Thank you, Michaela. Michaela Kufner is our chief political editor.
David McAllister is with me. He's the head of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the European Parliament. Mr. McAllister, in Brussels, I'm sure everybody was also closely following every move of Friedrich Merz, who many already see as being a pretty safe ticket to potentially become the next chancellor here in Germany. How much credibility questions are being asked after he accepted far-right AfD votes to get a motion through the German parliament?
Germany is the largest country in the European Union, the leading economy, and that's why what happens in Germany matters for the entire European Union. Friedrich Merz is on very good track to become the next Chancellor of Germany. We are way ahead in the polls, ahead of all our opponents and all the other political parties. And if you were talking about what happened this week in Germany or last week, I mean, as a matter of fact, we did the right thing, but we got support from some of the wrong colleagues in the German Bundestag. But still, the population, the majority of the German people are behind what we have proposed to limit migration to Germany, to strengthen the rights of our border police, and also to stop family reunion for those people who are not entitled to stay in Germany anyhow. So we have the majority of the people behind us. I deeply regret that Socialists and Greens, for tactical reasons, were not ready to work with us together on this important matter.
But now you have people here out on the streets in Germany, and it's become almost a moral debate on whether there could be future actual cooperation with the far-right AfD, although Friedrich Merz keeps saying that simply is not on the card. So how much of a hard sell do you expect this to be to the voters here in Germany?
CDU and CSU have been crystal clear. There will be no form of cooperation with the AfD. Certainly there will be no form of coalition with the AfD for obvious reasons. The AfD is totally against that, what we Christian Democrats in Germany stand for. The AfD is against NATO. The AfD is against the European Union. The AfD is pro-Putin, pro-Russia, and against Ukraine. I mean, these are fundamental issues. That's why we are fighting the AfD. We want to convince as many people as possible that every vote for the AfD in the end is a wasted vote.
And at the same time, you want to return to the very issue of the economy. How will your strategy be to talk about what Germans actually themselves in the polling say is their biggest concern, which is the economy, which is the issue of migration?
Well, we're going to hear our party leader and future Chancellor Friedrich Merz give his speech in a few minutes. And I'm very sure that he will very much focus on exactly these questions, the economy and how we can get the German economy back on track. We now have more than 3 million unemployed people in Germany. We are in a recession. The German economy is falling, and that is not good for Germany. That's not good for the people. And by the way, it's also not good for Europe. That's why I'm very sure that we will focus in these last 2.5 weeks in the election campaign, apart from migration, security, defense, and other important matters, on the key topic of how to get Germany more competitive again, because that will be key.
Now, we saw a ferocious attack of all sides against each other in the German parliament last week. At the same time, the way the German system works, the way the election system is built, there will be a necessity for these very parties tearing each other apart at the moment to actually find their way back to form a coalition at the center. How can that actually happen? They called each other liars in parliament.
We are now very much focused the last 20 days on exactly what will happen on election day, on that Sunday in February, on the 23rd of February. And afterwards, we will have a look at the results. And then we will see how we can form a majority in the next German Bundestag. We will talk to those parties who are pro-European, pro-democratic. That means there will be no talks at all, not even a single second, with the AfD. And then we will see how much of our manifesto, how much of our program we can actually implement with other potential coalition partners. But as a Democrat, I would always say, Democrats among each other must always be ready and willing to find a consensus and to find a compromise for the benefit of the people.
Now, you're clearly focused on these less than 3 weeks up to Election Day on February 23rd, but Donald Trump has already said, and he actually reiterated, that there would be tariffs on Europe, they would be coming soon if they take place before. How much is the political system, Europe's largest economy, actually capable of finding a consensus on how to react?
Well, this will be tackled at European level, at EU level. We are reaching out to the US administration at all levels, trying to convince the Trump administration that tariffs are the wrong way, that in the end this will just be a lose-lose situation for both sides. Because if the Americans start imposing sanctions on us, the European Union will have to retaliate with sanctions on goods coming from the US to Europe. And this in the end is not good for both sides. We should strengthen our transatlantic cooperation and not start a totally unnecessary trade conflict.
David McAllister, head of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the European Parliament, thank you very much.